All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome back. Grab your seats. Lots of space in the front here. Just gonna talk for a couple seconds while you all settle down and start being quiet. These are classroom tactics for those of us that spend a lot of time with students, and we know that we need to just keep talking until they realize that it's time to start paying attention to the front here. Great. Perfect. Nice to have you all back for this afternoon. We have a really great panel lined up on the topic of sort of a research assessment of sort of processes, outputs, publication channels, and sort of a nice series of talks lined up. I'm not really going to spend very much time up here. I'm just going to introduce, we have sort of the same format as we've had before. So we have one 30-minute session. We'll have Vanessa here with Melissa, sorry, mixing up with Vanessa here is going to help with the timing, so just for the speakers to get a little 5-minute warning and a 2-minute warning, so just keep your eye out over there. And then she has one big one that says stop if you are over your time. We'll try to keep things running on schedule. So first up is Charlotte Finn. I'll welcome you up here to start your talk. Thank you.
As far as is known, there's never been an ivory tower of such size that humans could climb with it and stay in it for extended periods of time. Yet the notion of such has appeared periodically since antiquity. There are references to the tower both in the Bible and the Odyssey and in medieval and Renaissance literature. Even in the modern literature, the tower appears on a regular basis. No wonder, because it's a good image. The expensive and exotic ivory with its fine green color signals something elevated and refined. Correspondingly, the tower, it rises above the surface of ordinary things and approaches the sky. From the tower, you can maintain an overview without being caught up in the tumultuous events of daily life. In the beautiful surroundings of the ivory tower, you can take care of your esoteric tasks far from the noise and bustle of the real world below. Over the years, the ideas of who lived in the tower had changed. The Virgin Mary is supposed to have lived there in the 12th century. She was followed by various religious celebrities towards the 19th century, but after which the tower was occupied by artists and estates. For the last 50 years, the ivory tower has most often been used to describe a place where especially researchers seem to have a strong urge to stay. In that context, the tower is used to describe an elitist and self-sufficient research culture which is relatively indifferent to the extent to which the research is useful in society and outside the tower, and whether society is informed about the research and its results. In the ivory tower, research is done for the sake of the researchers, and the results of the research are communicated to a small, selected, and narrow group of research colleagues. Below the tower, in contrast, citizen science is carried out. Presentations are given at community centers, interviews are given to journalists, exhibitions are held, popular science articles are written, all to make the research understandable and digestible outside the tower. Over the last 50 years, scientists have alternately been chased up and down from the ivory tower. Because on one hand, the current new management paradigm that universities current university management paradigm have required measurable resource that could be easily reported to funders. Such requirement can most easily be obtained through single-track publication strategy with a focus on publishing in international peer-reviewed journals. The reason for this is simple. If researchers only publish their work in one type of platform, then it is easy, cheap, and fast to obtain data on their production. This is much more complicated if anything goes, if researchers are allowed to publish on any platform they like. The publishing industry has underpinned this development by making data on publication behaviors of researchers widely available to university management. However, many international peer-reviewed journals are neither accessible nor readable outside the tower. On the other hand, university laws, journalists and the general population, politicians, together with a large group of socially committed researchers, regularly argue that activities held below the tower should also count on the researcher's CV. You cannot blame the researchers who have entrenched themselves up in the tower if you are a researcher under the current paradigm where it is largely only number of publications and citations that counts in relation to promotions and job opportunities. Then there's simply no time and no incentives to mend the space below the tower. But there are many indications that change is on its way, because the single string publication system has brought countless of ills with it, including cheating with citation, trading of authorships, peer reviewer fatigue, and the establishment of a para-academic industry consisting of, amongst others, the scientific publishers and the university rankings that milk the university for taxpayer money. The business model of the scientific publishers is well known and much criticized by librarians and researchers. The publishers receive their raw material, our articles, for free. They make us do the processing, that is the editing and the peer review, for free too, and then they sell our own research back to the university libraries at constantly increasing fees and constantly increasing article processing charges. But what is even more fascinating about the whole thing is that the academic publishing industry has established a system where they both own our publications and the data being used to calculate the most generally accepted performance measures like the H-index, the citation rates, and journal impact factor. In this way, the academic publishing industry is holding academia hostage. If they have both our publications and the data used to assess us, there's no way of escaping. The only thing we can do is to pay our APCs and annual subscription fees. Less well known, but quite similar, is the business model of the global university rankings. They were born in China in the zeros. The regime had launched an ambitious education and research policy that wanted to show the world that China was making an academic frog leap. Therefore, they created ARVU, a dynamic ranking list so that everyone could see how China moved up while the rest of the world consequently was moving down. The idea fitted like a fist in a glove with the new public management winds that was seriously ravaging the academic world in the early zeros. The Chinese had put together a kind of compound measure consisting of data that were relatively easy to obtain: number of publications, citation rates, student evaluation, employer satisfaction, amount of external funding, degree of internationalization, and so on. Each data set was assigned a percentage weight. The method came to form the subsequent ranking lists. It sounds enticing, but as always, the devil lurks in the detail. It is highly disputed what these data actually indicate. For these reasons, the lists are constantly criticized, but paradoxically, it only has made it worse because an interesting distillation process emerged from these discussions. The most conscious ranking agency fold their cards in recognition of their own inadequacy, while the others ride out the storm by slightly adjusting the weight of the various data sets and then continue as if nothing has happened. I will zoom in on one of the lists: Time Higher Education. It was originally a supplement to the newspaper The Times, published by the company TESS Global, which provides various services to the education and training sector. In 2021, TESS Global was sold to Canadian Onyx for the sum of no less than 5 billion euros. TESS Global has a gross profit of almost 60 million euros per year. Over the past several years, earnings have increased by 4% annually. What the Times Higher Education offers is a freely accessible database containing information about the world's universities. It is widely used by students who seek information on where to study and faculty looking for job opportunities and collaborations. And last, but certainly not least, politicians and decision makers distributing funds for research. Times Higher Education's income stems from a palette consisting of web advertisements for universities, academic job ads, ranking of search results, and optimization of searches, and from consulting services for the universities that want to climb the rankings. A 3-hour visit by such a consultant costs about 20,000 euros. In this way, the ranking agencies have created a financial perpetual motion machine. For every time a university moves up the list, another one moves down, and will therefore feel encouraged to hire a consultant to regain its position, because there's big money at stake here. Temple University Business School in the US offers an online MBA. In November 2021, the Dean of Temple University Business School was convicted of having tampered with the students' exam data in order to get a better ranking. While the school was ranked high, it received approximately 330 students annually. When it was removed from the ranking list because of the scandal, student enrollment dropped to approximately 100. Each student pays about 50,000 euros for the program. Long story short, an industry that parasites on the current new public management inspired paradigm where quick fix numbers are in demand as for the proxies for research quality has emerged. It has grown out of and thrives upon the current single-track publication system. The good thing is that the current system is under tremendous pressure, so much that is reason to assume that change is inevitable. The research libraries battle to pay the constantly increasing subscription fees. The researchers struggle with the research funders to grant article processing charges that are far beyond the actual production cost of the academic publishing industry. The journal editors find it increasingly hard to find qualified peer reviewers because the qualified ones suffers from peer reviewer fatigue. So they end up settling for unqualified reviewers, making the whole process of peer review increasingly dubious. And last, but certainly not least, there's a growing awareness of the perverse incentives created by the focus on publishing in international journals. It is therefore good news that on July 8th this year, an agreement that serves to reform the current methods for assessing researcher and research qualities has been finalized. The initiative comes from the EU Commission, and the process has been short and effective. From March to November 2021, investigative work took place, which led to the so-called scoping review. You can find it on this link. Based on this report, a drafting of an agreement started in January 18, 2022. During the spring 2022, the European and other international research institutions were invited to contribute to the text. Approximately 350 institutions signed up in support for this agreement. The list can be found on this link. The agreement's mission is quite clear and straightforward. That assessment of research, researchers, and research organization recognizes the diverse outputs, practices, and activities that maximize the quality and impact of research. This requires basing assessment primarily on qualitative judgment, for which peer review is central, supported by responsible use of quantitative indicators. What should be highlighted in this recognition of diverse output and the focus on qualitative assessment. This is good news for the researchers of humanities and social sciences, who, due to the current publishing paradigm, has been largely deprived of incentives for participating in the societal debates. essentially to these disciplines and to the societal development below the ivory tower. The vision of the agreement is promising and could be an important step towards pulling the rug under the business model of the ranking agencies and the scientific publishing industry. How? Well, simply because it is the use of simplistic quantitative measures for assessing research quality that is the basis of their business model. And the data for such calculation are easy to obtain because of the single-track publication strategy, where only double-blind peer-reviewed articles count. So a new system where publishing on different kinds of platforms are encouraged and where more weight are put on qualitative assessment will, in the long run, undermine. The institutions that sign the agreement must implement 10 core commitments, of which 5 seem particularly relevant in this context. First of all, they must, as stated in the vision statement, recognize the diversity of contributions to and careers in research according to the need and nature of research. And again, in accordance with the vision statement, they must base research assessment primarily on qualitative evaluation for which peer review is central, supported by responsible use of quantitative indicators. They should abandon inappropriate uses of research assessment of journal and publication-based metrics, in particular the inappropriate uses of journal impact factor and age indexes. Note here that the agreement still allows for the use of traditional metrics, but aims at establishing better standards for when to and when not to. The signing institution should avoid the use of rankings of research organizations in research assessment. And finally, commit resources to reforming research assessment as is needed to achieve the organization. Politicians and decision makers have been relieved of the burden of studying long research assessment reports. There's something wrong here. Yep, sorry, I skipped something. There's hope that all the approximately 350 European research institutions and international organizations that have expressed an interest in the reform work will sign the agreement during 2022. But if we truly want reform of the current system, then more than a signed agreement is needed. We need a genuine shift of managerial paradigm and a cultural change in academia, and both are prone to meet resistance. Numerous research careers have been built on the current system. Researchers have been recruited over the last 20 years for their ability to produce international journal articles and not their ability for academic multitasking. Qualitative research assessment is expensive and time-consuming and takes time away from what could have been researching. Politicians and decision makers have been relieved of the burden of studying long research assessment reports that have made their life a lot easier to outsource the assessment of research qualities to peers and journal editors, and then to determine research quality as a sort of sum of the institution's international publications and their citations. If the new reform is successful, this will naturally become much more complicated, more expensive, and more time-consuming, but will, in return, give taxpayers a better access to research and its result, and in the long run, contribute to making research more present in the everyday life outside the universities. Previous attempts to do this has often run aground on how difficult it is for us researchers to disseminate on many platforms. But the good news is that publication pressure on the previous years have contributed to researchers creating by themselves new forms of collaborations that could help them shifting towards a much more multifaceted publication systems. Researchers have moved away from the culture of lonely cowboys towards the formation of research groups that collaborate across disciplines, institutional and national boundaries. This could be the key to the realization of a different, flexible, and multifaceted publication system, because research groups can be put together like cycling teams. Everyone on the cycling team is a strong rider, with some being strongest in the mountains, others in headwinds, and others driving in the mountains. Establishing research groups with an eye for talent diversity will be possible. It will be possible to inhabit and populate the area below the ivory tower and all of its floors. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you for the introduction. So, well, we're going to talk about books now again, and outside of the ivory tower, actually on the ground, I'll present something very concrete that we have developed as a new service, which we hope will create more trust in open access book publishing. So this is what you can expect from the next 10 minutes. I represent the OAPEN Foundation, which is dedicated to open access scholarly books, so peer-reviewed books, and actually comes from university presses 15 years ago coming together to build a platform, and now it has developed quite a lot, so that we today have more than 400 publishers bringing their books to the platform. And we provide services to those books, but we also operate the directory of open access books together with Open Edition. So my co-director is Pierre Monnier. And next to that, we also have the Open Access Books Toolkit, which is a public information resource on all kinds of topics related to OA book publishing. So if you have questions about it, you can search them up, or you can ask us to write about a certain topic that you can't find them. But for this presentation, I will be focusing on the directory of open access books. And just to give you a few numbers and background. So as I said, we built the OAPEN library, but while doing that, we were thinking about having also an open directory inspired by the DOAJ. And so in consultation with DOAJ, we invented the idea of PUAB, which was then launched in 2013. And it has grown as a global index of peer-reviewed open access books, all with an open license, meaning, well, it can be any open license, basically, for instance, the Creative Commons licenses. We have more than 60,000 titles indexed from more than 600 publishers in many languages. But we are not quite there yet. We want to expand. We want to include more publishers, especially from Asia and Africa. All the metadata is free. It's running on DSpace6 open source platform, and we integrate very well with libraries who use the metadata in their library systems and make the publications visible to their patrons. Okay, also just to understand the difference between what DOAB does and what, for instance, OAPEN or Open Edition or Project Muse or JSTOR does. So the DOAB is a directory sort of aggregating data from these different aggregators. So it's trying to make like an umbrella. Obviously, there are also many individual publishers or platforms that we work with. So this service that I'm going to talk about is called the Peer Review Information Service for Monographs, PRISM. And I'll come back to that. But you can see that what we're trying to do is really opening up the black box of peer review. So what is going on in the peer review process, the quality assurance of the books. And we provide this service because we want to give publishers an opportunity to display, to declare information about how they perform their peer review in a neutral fashion. And by doing that, we think we support transparency about the quality assurance process and for open access book publishing, but more generally for academic book publishing. And the way that works, oh, by the way, we don't have really a logo yet.
we're working on this. This may delay things a little bit. I attempt. No, just joking. But you may recognize this logo, those of you who know about this band called Pink Floyd. So we're not trying to copy their logo, but this is a prism, right? So we'll think about something. Okay, so looking a bit more closely, what we actually do to begin with is that we invite publishers who are already indexed in DOAB. So one of these 600 plus publishers, and invite them to answer to a few questions about their peer review process. So basically, when is the book peer reviewed? So the timing of it, at what stage of the editorial process? What is being peer reviewed? Is it the proposal, or is it the full manuscript, for instance, and who is overseeing it, etc. So these are standard questions that we ask about, and basically what the publisher will be doing is ticking some boxes. So that information is going through as being processed, and then it ends up as a sort of a hyperlinked logo where you can click it up. I will show you later, and then you can see what the publisher has declared for this book, or for a book series, or actually for the whole publisher. Then this information goes into the DOAB database. So we store that information, and we push it downstream as part of the metadata to libraries and funders and any reader of the books. We also have a scientific committee of experts in this field, globally represented, who's supporting us in discussions around quality assessment and peer review. So just to show you how it works, so we have a book here, and you can see that this title, next to the title Behavior Development and Evolution by Open Book Publishers, there's a small sort of our current logo. And so if you click that, you'll get this information. So basically the information stating what has been peer reviewed, who has done it, how it's been done, and when has this been taking place. We've tested this with a number of different publishers, big commercial publishers, small scholarly university presses, and so on. And so we have adjusted to cater to different needs. But this is how it looks like. You can also, as a publisher, add natural text. So you can, if there is any specific thing you want to let readers know, you can do that too. And as I said, if you scroll down the page, you'll see the metadata here. That is also part of the Dublin core metadata that is carried with the book. So to conclude, just a few things. This is definitely a first step for us. So we try this out in a very simple way, actually, to shed a bit more light into that process, which for books is really it's performed in many different ways, depending on where you are in the world. We are actively promoting bibliodiversity. With that, we mean diversity in terms of languages, publishing culture, different practices across the world. So we are not trying to enforce one unified standard of peer review, saying, well, this is the way to do it. We are trying to promote an opportunity for publishers to show what they actually do. And then as a reader, you have more insights into what you can expect. So that is a balancing act on the one side to embrace diversity and to provide a useful service which is more standardized. And when it is standardized and when you have the information in the metadata, you can also query that metadata, and you can filter on that information which the publishers are providing. So we hope this is not only for open access books. Actually, we could easily think that this would also work for any book, because the quality assurance process is independent of whether it's open access or not. And we'd very much like to get your feedback. So if you play with this, or if you have any thoughts around this, we'd very much like to hear back from you. And we will be announcing this more broadly when we go live very soon on Twitter, and we have a newsletter, etc., that you can sign up to. And of course, we expect this to, as I said, being a first step with future developments that we will see. hopefully to support more trust in open access book publishing. Thank you.
And
Hi, everyone. My name is Vladimir Otasic. I'm coming from University of Belgrade School for Electrical Engineering. I'm working in Computer Center of University of Belgrade as developer and engineer for programming the academic software. So this presentation, in next couple of slides, represent the different types of index citation databases that could be used for developing the method for assessment of research outputs. So this slide represents what's the problem with the assessment. It could be defined in the free statement. We have the research outputs that are not recognized even by the community or by the decision makers, and by that there doesn't exist any kind of regulation that would support appropriate way how to evaluate those outputs, for example, software or data sets. So what should we do about those outputs? On the other hand, we have Scopus and Web of Science that are considered to be traditional index citation databases that have already gained significant impact on the scientific community, which have reflected on their way how they advance in their career. And they are in competition to achieve more index articles, more citation counts. So the question here is, is there any kind of alternative for, or any kind of additional tools how to support that? If we have research outputs that cannot be valued and assessed with those traditional citation indexes, does it mean that those research outputs are valuable at all? On the other hand, we could define 4 types or entities that are recognized as participants in the process of evaluation of research outputs. We have research output as itself. Assessment of research output would indicate the quality, the impact, and the achieved influence of that research over the time. And at the end, it will define was that carried out research have achieved the expected successfulness. We could define researchers as the collection of their productivity. And by assessing their productivity, we could define and develop certain tools for monitoring their productivity over time, which could be used for ranking or finding their relation to other scientists and publications that are written in the same scientific field. We have an institution which is seen as the group of researchers, and for them, assessment of research outputs is quite important for defining whether the projects were successful or not and how the results have been represented. The 4th entity, which is different from those already mentioned, they are defined as decision makers. They have to follow the updates and new metric system that could be developed and how they could adopt them in certain policy level. So traditional citation indexes, scopus and web of science, like I mentioned, have already been regulated in local decision makers. They have left high pressure for the researchers to write outputs that research outputs that will be indexed by the journals. The problem for the IT perspective is that this software is commercial product, so it acts like a black box. We know what is indexed, we know what we could get and retrieve like a data, but how the process has been done, it is like a black box. Further functionalities that could be used for developing additional metric mechanisms could be implemented or the index data, and Scopus and Web of Science have those tools. But the problem with them is that they all require certain subscriptions. So does any kind of alternative can be applied here? Here in this slide is suggested two kinds of databases. We could use Automatic, which track completely different kind of source data, track the influence over the internet, like social media, posts, blogs, newspapers, and so on. They support tracking those research outputs with with using the predefined parameters, which could give the end users information how certain research outputs have been influenced on the particular part of Earth or certain scientific community. For IT perspective, it is useful because they support many APIs that could be integrated for developing some let's say from scratch software or custom-made software. And it is more important if we already have the existing infrastructure, then we can use those APIs to upgrade them. The disadvantage that is seen in Automatic is that they base most of their metric count on the outputs that have DOIs. On the other hand, we have the Dimensions, which is a database that is completely alternative to the traditional citation databases. It is considered to be more open and inclusive than the traditional one. Like the Automatic, it supports different APIs that could be used for searching outputs across the internet, and has the same disadvantage because the data is based on the research output that is indexed and have the OIs. So let's see what would be done. Can we extend this corpus of index data? We have open databases like Open Citations, which is completely founded on the principles of open science, and furthermore, it follows the FAIR principles. They found a solution with maybe that wasn't the reason, the DOI maybe wasn't the reason why they did this, but they certainly have implemented their system by integrating the external system for providing persistent identifiers. They provide different APIs depending on the existing infrastructure. For example, if we want to use directly establish the connection between databases, we could use SPAR as well, or using endpoints in REST APIs. And for someone who just want to search the open citation, they already have implemented the search interface. We have the more recently launched OpenAlex, which is acting as the collector and aggregator of different sources. Those sources are mostly based on the open data, or ORCID, ROR, DOIs, and so on. Supporting integration with custom solutions for providing different functionalities. For example, if we want to implement the system for recommendation, we could use those data. It was expected that by the end of summer, they would launch the new tool for supporting full web search, but until now, we can only be satisfied with the APIs. So let's see what can we find some kind of combination of these three kind of databases and to determine whether they could be used for assessment. So this is 5 characteristics that define like the most important characteristics for defining the assessment methods. It must be sustainable. By this, it means that any kind of end users, no matter it is considered to be researcher or institution, it must be sustainable. By that, it means they should be permanently affordable. The second one is applicable. On this conference, we have many mentions about the difference between scientific fields and the importance of social science and humanities. So those measures have to be applicable on different types of research projects. Integrable, important for the existing infrastructure to provide the possibility of incorporating the external tools in the, let's say, custom-made software. We have trustable, collected index data provided by those index databases have to be based on the reliable methods or on the other sources that are based on reliable methods. And finally, verifiable, which means that every data retrieved through those services must contain some kind of method that could be used for checking whether something is true or not. Thank you.
Next up is Raj.
Okay, good afternoon. Today's topic actually is a follow-up of previous speakers who spoke a lot about assessment of scientists' work. So for today, I chose the topic of incentives and rewards for scientists. We all know that the science should bring us breakthroughs and innovations. However, these assessment tools we use or are subjected to every day show us that there are plenty to be desired of in terms of objectivity and some different approaches to assessment of scientist work. Since evaluation of scientist work is necessary, we all think of different approaches that should be taken into account when assessing somebody's outcomes in science. Incentives are very easy to explain. An incentive or a reward is a benefit, reward, or cost that motivates an individual to an action. The first academic monetary reward, which is actually the centerpiece of my speech, can be traced back to the 18th century to France, and the largest reward that is still in place in our world is the Nobel Prize, which is rewarded every year in different fields. In addition to the monetary reward, which is a special type of reward, we have the intrinsic reward of doing science, that is satisfaction of solving a scientific problem. Sometimes this reward is not visible. It's highly subjective. We feel that we accomplished something, but it's not always recorded or assessed in any way. Then we have the academic prestige, which is actually very formal. It is recorded in journals, presented at conferences. And of course, there is a monetary reward, which is also a type of reward, which is presented in some countries. These motivations do not necessarily lead to the high quality science output. And we'll see that some countries went to some types of extremes when speaking about monetary reward. One of the most famous or most famous example come from China or Chinese universities. China started its monetary or cash reward system in 1990s. It was actually idea that Chinese scientists should publish their work outside China, making Chinese universities more visible to the world. They started with a very small sum of $25 per published articles, and during the years, they ended up with $165,000, was frequently awarded to the first author if this author or authors published a paper or a journal article in Nature or Science. These practices, as stated in the literature, should have been stopped in 2020. I don't know whether or not this is the case, and because it led to very bad science, which didn't brought any real breakthroughs, and anyone following the output of Chinese scientists could notice that Chinese scientists were very numerous in numbers in many scientific journals, and at some point it became obvious that they are very motivated to do so. There are other universities and countries that also had or have still cash rewards. Qatar, United States universities. When speaking about data sharing rewards, there are almost none. Scientists are usually fighting for the credits for data stored in some repository. And this is more or less their protection from data scooping and for academic prestige to be one of the scientists that actually put their data into repositories. Now, for the second part of presentation, I have the real-life examples of cash rewards in different parts of the world. This is one of the American universities. I don't know whether or not you can see from behind of this hall. These cash rewards are different. Sometimes there are support for traveling funds, and sometimes there are direct incentives in cash to scientists. Each university has its own publishing policy. For instance, this is a Turkish university which has direct cash incentives for its scientists. This is something that I took from the Asia. In Asia, there are many examples of universities who actually have cash rewards. They have the explanation why they are doing so, usually to attract more attention to these universities and to push scientists to publish more in international journals and less in local journals. So they have it with names, the new policy, the new scheme, etc., stating that each individual who publishes something will receive monetary support. This is an example from Jordan. There are direct cash rewards for publishing in journals which are on some type of a national list. So every university or every country has its preferred list of journals, and people who are publishing these journals get the monetary reward. This is the Australian example. We have outlet rank, two types of A journals, and you have this monetary prize, value of prizes associated with the HDR student publication. So it's not necessarily the scientists, but also PhD students or so. This is another example. You can see engineering stream, award for the publication of tech books, not only journals, in relevant engineering disciplines. So every university has its policy with stating the cash rewards. This is also from India. So Asian example. Also, you have tables, many tables. This is not the only one. Stating the monetary rewards which are available. This is one example from the UK also, where you have a new incentive policy, invitation to revise and to publish paper in some ranking, highly ranked journals. The lists are usually decided by the university or some national body. This is the example from the Philippines. So actually incentive rewards for publication. So to sum up, there are many examples. I didn't expect to find them easily, but in Asia and some parts of the world, they are easily found. And the Chinese are less easily found because there are sometimes internal documents which are not available to the public. So to sum up and to return to the title of this presentation, in some cases, such rewards are good because young researchers, young scientists need some kind of a push to perform better, to be motivated to publish, but also it's stressful for them. Bad because these cash rewards can lead to very bad science, repetitive research, follow-up research, and not longitudinal studies or something that is breakthrough, because people are just summing up their points for advanced academic advancement and looking for an opportunity to publish their papers in highly ranked journals. And possible, colleagues before me spoke about new and alternative tools and evaluation systems which could take place or replace the current systems which are biased, which are very bad actually for all of us, but they're still in place. So all scientists, of course, at the universities are also suggested to publish in open access channels, but this is not the universal case. So some countries are very modest in presenting such papers or articles or conferences. And instead of that, they are putting the visibility of universities and their countries in the first place. And this is something that is taking us back to the system we actually want to replace. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi everyone, it's William calling you again after yesterday, and I hope you now welcome up after lunch. I'll try to be brief. This is the sort of, if I'm allowed to say that, my dearest study so far. I've been an editor of a journal called Research Integrity and Peer Review for now 3.5 years, and I was very lucky for the last almost 7-8 years to be involved in a COF project funded by European Union that revolves around peer review. And one of the biggest questions I had as a young researcher then is, what does peer review actually do? We base all of our science on peer review, but the studies that actually demonstrate that peer review does something are very few in number and often not as encouraging as we think. And so it was our goal to start collecting all of these studies that look at peer review. So we are currently doing something which is called a living systematic review, meaning whenever a new peer review study comes out, we're adding it to the database. Please do continue. We have a list of all the studies that we included on the project website, including a form in case we've missed any, that you can maybe send us a link and add them. Now, in 2002, first systematic review on peer review was published, and it said that we have absolutely no evidence of effects of peer review. Now, as editors, we know that we can do sometimes incredible work, but we just don't publish what it is exactly that we do, and we haven't demonstrated it to the world. And so we started to collect any study that has looked at differences between a submitted manuscript to a journal and then the version that was published. or between a preprint and a version that was published, to identify what it is actually that during the peer review process, during the journal editorial process, what are the things that change. These are preliminary results. We haven't published this yet. We hope to publish this by the end of the year, first as a preprint, of course, and as a main study. But we've identified 29 studies that looked at this, published till the end of 2021, and 12 that have been published on this topic in this year. The last few years, we've been having calls that more and more of these studies happen, and I'm going to make the same call to you after I present these results, because I think we really need data to demonstrate to the world what it is peer review does. Of these studies, 80 have looked at differences between a submitted manuscript to a journal and that in a published, and 11 have looked at differences between a preprint and a published studies. The same number of studies, 18, have been done in biomedical sciences. We are desperately in need of studies that show what peer review does in humanities, or maybe logic, philosophy, or other studies, because those are not published at all. We have studies from biomedicine, from physics, from social sciences, but we don't have a single study from humanities to say what has peer review done in humanities. These studies are very diverse. They have looked at 150 or more different outcomes, meaning some have looked at what happens to the titles, some have looked at what happens to the abstracts, what happens to the references, what happens to the objectives, the method results. Everyone measures things differently. It is not easy, and majority of these studies are qualitative, meaning that a person, looks at one version of a document and another one, and then describes what changes happen. Of course, we use indexes as well when we talk about number of words or number of references, or even indexes that sort of tell you the sort of like targeting or authenticate that tell you the similarity of a text, but they don't, without a qualitative analysis, we cannot still identify the core of these changes that happen. In order to summarize the results, I wanted to use the words of these studies themselves. And so 16 of these studies of the 29 said that they found no significant differences between a submitted and a published version. 2 said they had 2 sample sizes to make any generalizable claims that peer review do anything. 4 from social sciences said that the majority of differences that happen in social sciences happen in the theory section. So not the methods or results, but the theory section that usually in social sciences comes after the introduction. And then we had 6 studies that said that some things change, but the majority of things that change are changes in the introduction and discussion. So adding a few references and comparing it to other results, meaning that the majority of the methods and results are the same as they have been submitted to our journals. Now that could either mean that all over the world we are conducting great research and that it should be published as soon as we submit it, or that none of us are really forcing our reviewers to focus on those specific aspects and give a clear stamp that methods and results or conclusions are really appropriate to what has been done. Let's see if this will click on. We are now conducting meta-analyses to try to quantify what actually changes. So I'll share here only 2 examples because I do want to keep this under 10 minutes. But one is we looked at does anything change in results, and we have seen that around 30% of studies, there's at least one additional number or one additional p-value being added or one additional outcome being explored. But those lead in less than 10% studies to actually significant changes to results. So meaning that maybe we ask them some additional sensitivity analysis or some sub-analysis, but that doesn't really change the main findings of the studies themselves. Now, as a meta-researcher from the field that I come, I was also interested, bear in mind these are studies that looked at what changes through the paper, of the papers themselves. And these authors who wrote these papers, only 6 of them, of the 29 studies, said what happened to their own papers during peer review. And of these, 29 studies, only 1 said that something significantly changed, but didn't describe what it is that significantly changed. And I think that this is being a little bit ironic. If we are studying a topic, we should be able to demonstrate or thank the reviewers if something changed in our paper. Or maybe this is just another proof that a lot of things don't change from the version that is submitted to the one that is published. Now, I don't think there's a lot of limitations to this study. One, we cannot, because if you have a submitted version and a published one, you cannot differentiate if you don't have access to reviewer comments, an editor's comments, or copy editor's comments. You don't know these changes. Did they occur because of something that the reviewer said, or because of something that the editor said, or something that the copy editor said? So we haven't gotten to that granularity level that we can definitely, where it is from. And of course, some of the changes may have happened because maybe if they posted something as a preprint, they got an email from a colleague, and so they introduced it as a change. Not at all because reviewers said something, maybe because they wanted an additional change, or maybe they identified an error only during the proofing process or something. So we don't know that level, but still it seems to be very discouraging that papers don't really change a lot. We also don't know, we know from experience as editors that usually what we call lower quality papers require more work for us to get them in a shape that we want them to be in a journal. But again, we have no proof that this is really happening and what percentage of those. Now, of course, in a lot of journals, majority of rejections happen on the desk rejection rate. We are here talking only about papers that have gone through peer review and been published. Maybe a lot of our work is being, rejecting papers that we don't think deserve. The problem with this is we've seen a bunch of other studies that have said that the majority of things that are not published in my journal, and we've done the same thing for my journal, they just go end up in the second journal. We know as authors that if one journal doesn't accept us, I'll submit it to another one and third one, and being persistent, my personal record is 7 journals, rejecting the first time and then still getting published. So it doesn't mean that, things won't get published anyway. It just means that it won't go to my first choice the way it happens. Now, if we talk about the quality of the studies, let's say I've conducted a very simple survey on us here, what we think about preprints or what we think about anything else. It is unlikely that such a simple survey would be drastically changed by different journals peer review. It is more likely that Nature would not be interested because they don't maybe care about 30 people in Croatia where I'm talking about a specific topic versus, publishing something about genomes or something else. But if we think that a very basic study done in a proper way of the methodology that we teach them in the school could not be published in a different journal, then it seems that we are just selecting what we want to publish rather than how, profound or how significant those results are. There's a lot of other things here that we will, I won't mention, but I do want to mention something. If you are a publisher, please consider having an alert in the authors that you publish their submitted manuscripts. If you work for Springer Nature, they have an embedded platform which is called InReview, where all submitted manuscripts can be posted as preprints. Many other journals allow you to post preprints from my archive, archive, or any other archives that they can post them there. But unless we have access to submitted manuscripts, we cannot prove what is being done with peer review. And I know as an editor, sometimes a lot of our work, and we change those articles a lot. But bear in mind, here we have right now 40 studies, all saying peer review doesn't really do much. So if we want to show that it does something, we need that data. And in order to get that data, we need to have the submitted manuscripts from the authors and then your published. We also have never done the history of scholarly publication, a trial, when the same paper would have been given to different journals, and they invited different reviewers to see would they have differently improved that. So we have never run across journals trials to demonstrate how good or how bad specific peer reviews are. So we need to get that. I would also try to encourage you to open up your peer review process. Try to publish your peer review reports. There's many ways of how to do that. You can see our EASE guidelines on how to do that, because I know there's some communities that are resisting this, but if you expect your Supreme Court judges or any other judges to sign their name before their decisions, our reviewers can also sign their decisions if we encourage them. And last, let's agree what are the core outcomes that you want to assess. Do we want to focus on the methods change? Do we want to focus on the numbers of authors change or something like that? When we agree that all of these studies measure at least some specific things like the number of words and nothing else, then we can be able to better quantify what peer review does. And I want to mention, if I have in 15 seconds, 2 big trials that we are doing. Right now, with the help of Elsevier, we can launch a trial on 250 journals to implement what we call a structured peer review. So instead of asking reviewers that they openly comment the way they normally do, we ask them, we don't want that report anymore. We want you to answer only specific 10 questions, and we will only base answers on that 10. Don't bother. If you're an editor of a small field, I don't need you to improve the introduction and discussion of this paper. I need you to really tell me, do you think that the methods and results and conclusions come from where they are? And lastly, this was published a week ago. Elsevier has for the first time published peer-reviewed data of all of their journals from 2019 to 2021, and first time ever released the number of invited reviewers with the number of accepted and everything else. This is now available for all researchers to apply to study these databases. This is more than 1 million manuscripts across 3 years, and they plan to update it every year with all of the things that happen. I apologize because I didn't stick to my less than 10 minutes, but that's it today. Thank you.
Some time for some questions and some discussion. So same goes for those of you that are watching online. I'm monitoring here the Q&A and Zoom. If you want to go ahead and ask your questions on there, I'll be able to read them. You join there. I need to stay here for the online people, but so, do we have any questions in the live audience? Yeah. Oh, I see one over there. Go ahead.
I have a question for Mario. Maybe have you spotted any differences in the amount of changes in the published manuscripts among different tiers of journals in terms of presentation and indicators? And the other question is there a way to see is the fact that the reader has insight into original research data somehow reflects also the amount of changes that will happen, and how often the readers actually look at the data and seek to have access to the data.
Thank you, excellent questions. Because this is only 40 studies in the beginning of publishing, let's say 4 centuries, they have not went to that granularity. I hope they will, but we don't yet have access to that. But we have seen when it looks, the biggest study that has been done in physics, where they looked at 10,000 preprints of archive, and then where they ended. So they ended in thousands of different journals. And they didn't really find big differences based on the impact factors. But the sample size that we are talking today about 50,000 journals or more, and more than 150 million papers ever published since the beginning of time. So I'm not saying these are representative for everything, and we need more studies to be able to really come to that level. Majority of studies have openly, because the peer review data is never something that any of us, the researchers, can easily access. It has often been done by editors of that own journal that have access to that, and then it's always been reports for some of them. And there have been from Annals of Internal Medicine or BMC or BMJ that were top tiers, but not that they were comparing themselves to others to be able to answer that question. So not yet.
Another question in the front here. Oh, there's a big one there, and then we'll take the one in the front here.
Okay, sorry, my question is also to Mario. There is also the other side of the theory of the sciences. There are several studies that researchers has peer review improved your latest management published, vast majority of researchers say yes, indeed, but the only improved one. The quality of my data varies. So how does your contribution relate to the subjective evaluation of researchers such as peer review? And then the second question for other panelists regarding the library cover. I think one of the most important ways to get other cover is establishing language in other languages, especially the local languages. So how do you see this from the point of view of assessment practices? How can we improve the recognition of especially other local language applications?
So with the first one, we know that more than 85% of authors are very happy with their peer review, but that is related to authors whose papers have been accepted and published. They haven't described what the changes were, and we believe that most of those changes are readability and improvement in language and sort of structure. We are talking a few that they really improve the science behind it or the credibility of the science, and we haven't seen that. And unless we ask them in these surveys specifically what has been improved, we don't know what is there. So as an editor, I also think that peer review does a lot, but we need to be able to prove that. And right now it seems we're failing to prove that. And we're just relying on the fact that, peer review has to happen. And so we shouldn't question that. I think that's where we disagree.
And to try to answer your question, Well, I think the only way forward is reform of research assessment. My presentation is that as long as we have a current guideline where we only acknowledge the outline peer grading, international journals for promotion and tenure, then there will be no acknowledgement of local academic publications. But if we have a research assessment reform where we start acknowledging other outputs than just the international journal articles, then there's hope for Finnish language publication and Danish language publication and all kinds of publications. And they are actually within many disciplines very important because it doesn't make much sense to publish articles on Danish language development in English, for example. So it's essential for some areas of research that we have to perform. And I hope it's coming, I hope it's coming soon.
Yeah, just along the same lines, actually. So from my background as university president in Denmark, we published half of our books in Danish. We participated in Danish book fairs. So at a book fair, you have, everybody who's interested in literature basically coming. You can set up, there's an interview with the author, there's a lot of engagement. So you really get across to the audience, because you need to publish sometimes in local languages. It's really good for science, but it's also good for bridging to society. And next to that, I've seen another university president in Denmark. They've really engaged in other formats like news feeds, news programs, podcasts. They do all kinds of things trying to really disseminate scholarly knowledge to reach out further to citizens, basically. So I think there's a lot to be done, and really trying to promote different formats, but also add the local languages. Briefly.
I wanted to ask a question and also comment on this. I very much endorse all of these reforms, but I think we're being a little hypocritical as professors. When we choose students for our university, 10,000 of them apply for 300 positions, and we think that the objective measure is to give them a test in Europe and then rank them with that. We have never done that for professors. We neither have all professors being, selected in September, nor having open polls that they are applicable across the whole Europe as there are positions for students, nor have we agreed what is the transparent way of choosing them. And I think we're forgetting that. We think that we can treat students in a way that we can select them based on some previous characteristics and not apply the same characteristics to us. And I think that really needs to change. We are not really being fair how we select ourselves, and we are able to justify how we select students on a larger level. Never the application of positions in university is as big as number of students applying for that place, and we are able to select them. So I think we need to rethink some things that we're talking about here.
There's a question at the front thing. Oh, okay. Anybody else from the audience here?
I have a question about it, because I didn't get results.
Not mine, 40 different studies, not published by me.
We spend a lot of time on editing and we don't just evaluate the previous comments and trying to explore what is most relevant to them. We also go into more details mass importance to really report their results, the traditional, sometimes the traditional experiments, etc. So I think it's more related to the field. And actually, what is my question? This is more like a projection. My question is it really because of the pressure to publish things quickly? So most editors have, the feeling that they have to read the results of the review process in 2 weeks to completely large publishers. Days after there are some publishers who focusing on the results of 2 weeks, and is that something which influences that and pushes it towards it? Within the form and the quotation marks, the form of editors, the reviewers, or what do you think where is the origin of this crisis? And the crisis, there is not much impact to
Let's say one thing in response a little bit, that the answer kind of lies across all of these presentations, right? It's that the systems and databases that we use to measure, right? It's the incentive structures that are implicit, like made explicit sometimes, like in the case of like financial incentives, but also the incentive structures that are kind of in place around ways that we're valuing, placing this value on the peer review publication journal, which then gets to some of the questions that Mario is asking us to the question around why are we valuing this thing that we don't even necessarily understand. And so, you know, I'm seeing the answer to your question sort of across here, and invite anybody else that wants to comment, but I just wanted to sort of make that observation around seeing that this was, I think a little bit the point of this panel is that there's a lot of, we know that the way that we're doing assessment of research is leading to some bad outcomes, but the complexity around where is the best place to tackle it, or what we need to know to tackle it correctly, is something that as a community we haven't come to an agreement or haven't figured out how to make that turn around. So I invite for to start having some to start at the end. I was comment in and then Charlotte.
No, Charlotte. Okay. Wanted to say something first.
Actually, I think the new Commission's initiative is a very, very significant step forward. It's in the stage now where the institutions are supposed to sign it for the autumn, and it's going to stand on board with how many institutions end up signing it. But if many institutions end up signing it, it could actually be the first step forward in terms of creating basis for a real reform for research assessment, and abandoning the use of metrics, or at least being more conscious of how we use metrics and avoid the ranking wars would be a very, very important step forward, and also to acknowledge diversity of outlets. And that is sort of like the whole initiative in this so I think that would be the best solution for where we are now, that institution goes.
Yes, I wanted to comment on the reviewers. I think that conferences like this, the reviewers in the second plan somehow. As we speak about scientists, metrics, evaluation, but the reviewers are doing their job without any compensation. Using their own time, their own tools, whatever is available. We heard about structured peer review, which is again a good idea. I participated in such reviews, and these forms that are prepared in advance help me a lot. There is no free text, but you actually evaluate manuscript based on the criteria someone else prepared for you. But the reviewers are researched very rare, infrequently, and actually no one is asking them, or no one is asking them what they actually want, what would they want to have as a support, and what kind of recognition would they like to receive for their job. Because for every review I do locally, I received a kind of evaluation, actually not evaluation, but I had a receipt that I did it, and it is applicable in my advancement. So, but on the international level, there are some different types of recognition of PUBMET and some other places, and they are scattered all over the internet and all over the world. It's very difficult to gather all your accomplishments as a reviewer in one place and to present it to the people that are evaluating them. So it's not just an evaluation of researchers, but also we should evaluate and change something in the review system for the benefit of the reviewers.
Neil. Yeah, just short. So I think in some way, peer review is a bit like democracy. It's not perfect, but it's the best we have. And I think doing studies like you presented, or having this conference discussions about it, it's a way of improving things. We need to perform like democracy. We need to perform it. We need to improve it. We need to discuss it, and also acknowledge the differences. So I talked about books, and for books, it's really quite different to journal peer reviewing. You need to invest much more as a reviewer, especially when you publish in a local language, let's say in Croatian, on a history topic. So you will find many reviewers who can actually do this, perform the review. So sometimes you get into a very close collaboration on the manuscript to develop it properly. I think all these instances, this diversity of quality assurance is something we should be careful not to, get rid of, but rather discuss how we can improve it. And I think this is the occasion that we're doing it right now.
Something started.
I'm not suggesting that we abandon peer review. On the contrary, what I might be suggesting is that we professionalize it, meaning that we teach people how to do it. I started doing peer review a couple of years ago because it's simply not working on scientific review. And I started doing it when I found out that BMJ is actually using first year PhD students for peer reviews because they're so desperate to find peer reviews. And the journals because nobody wants to do it anymore because it's invisible and because we're not being acknowledged for it. Many people know that we're in the university, but at my university there's absolutely no incentive for doing peer review. So we need to make it transparent who's doing what. We need to be too open so that I can see who's peer reviewing my work, and I can actually see whether they're qualified for that or not, so that I can tell the editor that this person is actually not qualified for peer review my work, and so on and so forth. We still need to open up that black box. We need to professionalize it and teach people how to do it not peer review. We're not doing that at this moment. And that's such a shame because the peer review process in itself is actually a very good thing.
Where's it coming from?
Here, I thought you were going to say something.
Okay, go ahead. All right. Yeah, we got just one more minute. Yeah. Let's go ahead.
I know you said you found no changes so that you doesn't have manuscript, but have you found any indication that higher quality insurance have better review than no?
Currently, no. Please don't take, there's no changes, there are changes, but I said they focus mostly on introduction and discussion. And I don't think that that changes the credibility of the results so much. I think it's easier for us to comment, you have missed a study, please add a few references. Sometimes maybe even doing that in a bad way, cite myself instead of someone else. We don't have clear rules on what should be cited or not. But when you talk about the core of the research as a finding.
No changes before, but I don't know they offer better review. Is there?
We have no proof of that yet.
I think we're actually at the end of our discussion time, and so I think we're going to just close it out there, just in the interest of making sure we all get a chance to have our the next session their whole amount of their time. Thank you very much for the questions and discussion. I'm looking forward to discussing a few of you that I didn't get a chance to ask you, but we can do that during the break. So thank you very much, everyone all the time, joining me in thanking them, and thank you for your engagement.